Hey, Paul. So it's Luke Ford here in Los Angeles, and you're in, what, the Gold Coast?
Yep.
All right, good on you, mate. So when you were a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
That's a great question to kick off with, Luke. Gee, I didn't really know. I think I didn't know until I was in my mid-20s. I think I just wanted to try everything. That was my thing as a teenager. I wanted to give everything a try. I knew I wanted to be a millionaire by the time I was 30. That was one thing I thought was going to, create the world I could play in. But apart from that, I had no idea how I was going to get there.
And how did you discover the Alexander technique?
Well, Alexander came after a long road of searching after a car accident at 19. I had a whiplash injury in a fairly straightforward side impact. It wasn't a complete wreck. But it gave me a whiplash injury that then took me the next 4.5 years to find the answer to. And after trying all sorts of different physiotherapists and chiropractors and massage people and other chiropractors that were charging $190 per session, I was at the point where I was willing to spend any money. And the last physio that I'd spoken to had run out of ideas with me and said, okay, well, here's some anti-inflammatories. Take these whenever you need to. And I said to him, well, what happens if I need them all the time? And he said, oh, well, you can't take them all the time. And I said, okay, well, that doesn't sound like a very good option to me. So lucky enough, I was driving along listening to the talkback radio in my car one day. I was a sales rep at the time, in my car listening to the radio all day, every day, and I heard a guy being interviewed on a community radio station about this thing called Alexander technique. His name was Glenn Swift, and this was in Perth, West Australia. And as the story goes, I heard him say something that no one had ever said to me in my four odd years of looking for solutions. He said that with the Alexander technique, we look at the things that you're already doing that are causing the problems. And once you become more aware of those sorts of things and stop doing them, generally speaking, the problem goes away. And I thought, wow, that sounds like a very unique idea. So I grabbed his number off that show, made a phone call, and the rest is history, really. I didn't get any kind of wow experiences in my first session, not even my second. But he gave me some material to read, and I read it and thought, well, this makes sense intellectually. I can understand it. I don't know what he's talking about or what his hands are doing to me in a lesson. But I was getting a little bit of relief in those first sessions, and I said to him, I think, luckily, I asked him early on, how many sessions do you need or do I need? And he said, if you can give me about 10 sessions before you decide whether or not this is working, then see how you go. So I said, okay, I'll do that. So I didn't call the jury back in until that 10th session. By about the 7th session, though, I was well and truly hooked on it and knew that it was the thing that I'd been looking for. So that's where it started, and I had absolutely no intention for the first year of studying it of becoming a teacher, that's for sure. It wasn't that wasn't the calling that I thought I was searching for in the world, interestingly enough. But here we are.
So what year did you take your first lesson?
First lesson must have been 96 or 97, I think. Because it would have been 97, I think, because I had about 18 months worth of private lessons before I moved to Melbourne, and I began studying in 99.
So what caused you to want to study to become an Alexander teacher?
Wow. It was a couple of things that one of my teachers later on, Mark Baker, said to me one day, because I'd been seeing him for probably 6 or 7 months, and I was really loving it. My health was improving in every direction. It wasn't just, the back pain was pretty much sorted out within that first 10 to 12 sessions with Glenn. And I kept going back because I was a surf lifesaver, so I was paddling skis, and I noticed that my paddling improved, my health, my relationships, my communication, my patience, all sorts of things were improving. And this guy, Mark, said to me one day, you should think about becoming a teacher. And, I nearly choked, and I looked at him and said, what do you mean, do this all day? And he said, well, yeah. And I said, I couldn't do this every day with people. I just couldn't. He said, okay, and let it go. But it was probably a few weeks, I guess a month or so later, that I really started to think, well, I'm not happy doing what I'm doing as my job, which was a sales representative selling products and things that I didn't even believe in, it's pretty hard to do. And I wasn't really able to figure out anything else to do with my life, so I started thinking about it. I thought, you know what? Nobody knows about this Alexander technique. I managed to find it by luck. And the fact that nobody else knows about it, to me, presents perhaps a good opportunity for me to make a difference in the world, at least make a difference in the Alexander technique world, because more people need to know about this. And as that started to dawn on me, I started to realize, well, you know what, this is probably what I've been looking for. I want to do something that's not just about money. I want to do something that is investing my communication skills into a worthy cause. And as it dawned on me, I thought, well, maybe this is worth a try. So I started making inquiries and found that there was a school in Sydney and a school in Melbourne. What ended up ensuing was my wife at the time had a head office based in Melbourne, and the company said they were willing to transfer her to Melbourne. And so we started looking at that. 6 months later, we moved out of Perth into Elwood, and I signed up, joined the course in, I think, 1 month after it began in February, and off we went. But I think the main motivation for me wasn't so much to try and improve my health at that point, because I was in great shape. I felt invincible again. It was more or less to do the course, get the piece of paper, and then figure out a way to get this Alexander technique out to a wider community, because I just thought, gee, so many people need to know about this, and there must be thousands and thousands of people in my position who want answers, can't find them, and at some point give up when they're being told, look, you're going to have to just manage this pain. So here's some pills, take these pills when you need them, and otherwise come back and see me whenever you need to. And I think so many people get told, they're given that solution, and they say, oh, well, that's what the professionals said, I'll just have to live with it. So I think that's where it then became my intention to build a career around Alexander's technique in some way to help other people.
What kind of experience was the training program?
It was frustrating. It was very frustrating because I'd come from a job, a family business actually, which wasn't just being a sales rep, it was learning marketing and business and all of that. So I'd spent those 4 or 5 years within a company that was very independent, and one of my briefs was bringing energy drinks, energy soft drinks to the market. This was before Red Bull came to Australia, and we had soft drinks such as Jolt Cola and other crazy drinks that didn't make it once Red Bull came out. And one of my briefs was to manage the soft drink arm of our business, and I had pretty much not an open checkbook, but an open-minded boss, which was my father, who said, look, you do whatever it takes, but do it on the minimum budget you can. So I had to be creative. So I had all this sort of, grassroots type marketing experience over the years working with him and how a business should run. I got to the training school, and after the first week, I got home and I thought to myself, I don't know if I can do this for 3 years, because there just didn't seem to be any structure. It was such an organic type of learning process where not much seemed to be getting done. And obviously what I'd learned from my one-on-one lessons was enough to improve my health, but it had done nothing to really teach me about not end-gaining, not rushing ahead, not trying to achieve an end without fully considering the means whereby of getting there. So I think the first 18 months, maybe even 2 years of my training course, I was frustrated as all heck, excuse me, because I felt like I know all this stuff. I know all this. I wasn't getting anywhere. I didn't think I was learning anything. I just wanted to get out and start proliferating the world with Alexander technique. And at the end of my second year, I remember well, I left that course for the holidays over Christmas, thinking, look, if something doesn't change in me over Christmas break, I'm not going back. And I said to my wife, I just can't stand it anymore. I'm waiting and waiting and waiting for something to happen, for me to learn something that I don't already know. And it's interesting, how immersed in your own ego you can be that you don't see the lessons that are right in front of you. So I went back at the beginning of the third year with an attitude of, I don't give a shit. I'd given up trying, given up trying to get it, given up everything. And I convinced myself to go for that first week for one last look. And I showed up the first day, and Rosie Flayman was our assistant director. And that first morning of that third year of training, she put her hands on me and she said, she said, oh, something shifted in you, Paul. And I said to her, well, I don't know what it is, Rosie, because I just don't give a shit anymore. And she said, that's it. And I said, well, how could that be it? I just don't care. And she said, that's probably what you've been needing to learn, is to care less, to do less, and to let go. And I said, oh, I don't believe it. It was such a foreign idea after 2 years of being immersed in this slow, drawn-out process, which what it felt like to me, to finally go through that, what Michael Frederick calls that dark night of the soul, where you can't see either end, you're completely lost, and you have to give up, because you can't go back to where you were. You've come far enough to realize that you're at least heading towards something, but you don't know what it is. And that's what happened to me. She validated that it was okay for me to say, I don't care anymore. I give up. And from that point on, that third year, I just enjoyed every day, because then it was like the whole world was off my shoulders, because I was able to give myself permission to not try anymore. And that was a really tough lesson to get to for 2 years of every day of a training school.
Wow. At what point in the training did you start putting hands on?
It started a little bit towards the end of the second year, which was interesting to me. It was interesting, but it was mainly that third year putting hands on became part of the course. So up until that point, we were pretty much treated as, and I think that was part of the frustration, was, come on, let's move ahead. Just let me have a go at this and tell me what I'm doing wrong and I'll fix it as I go along. It's that old habit. It was the same thing I said in my very first lesson to this guy a Carrington-trained teacher, who put his hands, one under my chin, one on the back of my neck, started moving me in and out of the chair, didn't say a word. And I just felt in that first lesson, gee, I hope something changes, because I don't think I can handle this for 10. And all I wanted him to tell me was, what am I doing wrong so I can fix it? Or tell me the right thing to do and I'll do that. It was that kind of a vicious circle. And, in a sense, I've been learning that lesson. I learnt that through my training course. I've been learning it in different ways ever since. is that whole concept of letting the process inform you as you go along what the next best choice or decision is going to be, rather than getting so far ahead that you don't really know where the moment actually is. So once we started putting hands on, that third year, I really don't think I became that competent with my hands in that third year anyway. Perhaps it's interesting, perhaps the motivation to learn the Alexander technique in that 3 years was to get the piece of paper so that I could say, yes, I know what this is about, now I can go and sell it. So yeah, as far as the hands-on work went, I don't think I really started to learn that until I'd been working with people off the street for 3 or 4 years. I honestly didn't feel like I had much of a competence in that area at all, funny enough.
How significant was it to you to learn hands-on?
Well, I think it was very significant because I am a kinesthetic, tactile type of person. So what it gave me was a tangible sense of the moment. And being able to connect with somebody else gave me the information, I think, to ground myself much more solidly than if at one point before I found the Alexander technique, I had gone to see a naturopath, thinking, maybe this chronic back pain I've got, which was radiating up and down my arms and my legs, and headaches and head rushes, hypoglycemic type reactions. So maybe it's my diet. So I went and saw a naturopath, and after 3 months of a very strict diet where she recommended I remove dairy, wheat, caffeine, yeast and sugar completely from my diet, and also said to me at the time, give this 3 months before you decide whether or not it's working. I'd done that before I found the first Alexander guy. So anyhow, that's an aside. That gave me a good experience of giving something a shot before you judge it. But I looked at what she was doing. I thought, well, that's an interesting job. It's an interesting input into the world. You're helping people come to terms with things that they've got no control over. And I could consider doing that. But I think the difference with the Alexander technique was that once I found it, and then there was that hands-on content context where you're really connecting with a person. You're not just sitting there talking at them, instructing them, telling them what to do or where to go or how to do it, but you're connecting with them in that very intimate way that also informs you about where you are. I think that's what made the hands-on work become so much more important to me, because it was giving me the feedback that I could learn about myself in real time as I'm helping somebody else learn about themselves. So in a way which is holistically interpreted, if you like. So rather than reading from a book, learning about dairy, wheat and caffeine and all those sorts of things, and gluten, learning it out of a book, applying it yourself, oh yeah, that works for me, I feel good, and then telling other people what to do, I think the hands-on process has been the thing that has kept me so enjoying the learning process of the Alexander technique, because every single time there's something new to learn. It's not something they're saying to you verbally, oh, I don't like caffeine, or I don't. I mean, I'm comparing it to being a naturopath, but in reality, I think the real-time feedback that you get from working hands-on with somebody is incredible. And I could have gone to psychology, or I could have gone to counselling or something like this, but I just look at that kind of work and think, how do you really connect with a person? How do you really connect with them unless you touch them? And we're lucky and privileged, I think, in our work to have that as part of our toolbox. You know, I mean, I do presentations with larger groups of people where you don't get the opportunity to touch them. And there's certainly a lot of information you can give them, a lot of guidance, etc., that they can take away and use and apply and then come back. But when you can just touch someone just for 5-10 seconds, I think it's a luxury and a privilege to have that within our work.
Is Alexander technique bodywork?
Well, my experience of bodywork is, in the past, and even more recently, is kind of defined by the term bodywork. And you're working on a person's body, or you're working with their muscles or their meridians or their joints or their spine or something like that. To me, that is bodywork. But the work that I do and the work that I've experienced with, you know, so many wonderful Alexander teachers over the last 10 years is not just bodywork. It is not just bodywork. I have worked with Alexander teachers that the way they work, it could be confused with bodywork, especially if they don't speak, especially if they don't interact. Maybe they have a way of reaching into the person's psyche just by touch. I think there's such diverse ways of teaching Alexander that depending on which one you view or watch or experience, you could say, oh, that looks like bodywork to me. Looks like they're just moving the body around. But my way is asking them questions and keeping their mind interacting with what's going on at the same time. So it can't just be distilled down to a simple term such as bodywork. It is so much more than that, I believe.
What was the teaching style of the training school? Was it McDonald or what?
Well, I was really lucky because the director, David Moore, had trained in Sydney, and his course had been lucky enough to receive many different directors. It started off with a group of people who then gradually it changed. So he had many different people coming through his school. So largely a Carrington base, but there were other influences as well. So when he started his training school in Melbourne, I think David wanted to make sure that we got, and I was in the second training course that went through. So right from those early stages, his philosophy was to bring lots of different influences in so that we could experience the diversity of the Alexander technique and then choose for ourselves which sort of method or methods we wanted to employ. Rather than being taught this is the way to teach the Alexander technique because this is what Alexander did or this is what Carrington did or what MacDonald did, the different personalities in our course sort of were attracted to the different types of methods. So we had Vivian Mackey come to the course, we had Peter Grunwald, we had Nili Bassan, we had Karen Chapman, who trained in England, and she was a yoga and Alexander teacher. So it was a very, very diverse, and it was always changing. So whoever was visiting Australia at the time, and back 10 years ago, there weren't as many teachers coming. But nowadays, David has such a big school. I think there's 15 or 20 people in that school. He can bring all sorts of people out to Australia, and that's what I received. I received a very diverse. And then when I went travelling over to England in 2003, I went to as many different people as I could. I looked up Misha Magadov, and I went to the Carrington School, and I went to Peter Rebo's school, and went and met Chris Stevens, and that sort of thing, so that I could really get a feel for what else was out there. And what I really found was that no matter what the method was, each teacher had found a way, even if they had trained us with a Carrington School or with a McDonald type of style, they had found their way. With all the training they'd been given, they'd found their unique way of getting through to people. And that's what I think, that's what I do. Some people I touch very little because they seem to change before my eyes, and other people have got no chance. I have to put my hands on to give them an idea of exactly what I'm talking about. So I'm not sure whether or not that those different ways of working with people came through my training course or from the travels and studies I did thereafter. But to answer your question, we had a very diverse training school.
Which teachers have most influenced you?
Question. I ask that question of people when I interview them for my interviews, and that's a tough one to answer because there were so many different ones. I think Vivian Mackey. We used to, every Thursday at our school was Voice Day, so each school term we prepared a spoken or sung performance, and at the end of the term we did a concert, and that was it. So on the Thursday it was all about voice, and it's pretty confronting when you stand up in front of your peers, not just that they're people enjoying your performance, but they're looking at every single thing that you're doing and they're sitting at your feet. That's pretty confronting. So that work I learned a lot from, and when Vivian Mackey came to the school, when Vivian came to town, she was a lot more direct than the teachers in the all-day, everyday training course. She was very direct. And I found that the ways that she eventually got through to me, eventually got through to having me let go of my idea of what I should be doing, or let go of my way of singing, because I play guitar and I happily sing in front of people. I found that very moving. And, the ripples from the things that Vivian did were still affecting me years later, when I would remember things that she'd told me at the time, or things, the tricks she'd sort of played on me to try to get me out of my own way. They were still coming to me years later. I think Pedro de Alcantara, he had a great influence on me with his creativity, with the way he thinks, and the way he helps take you almost, I found him taking me out of my comfort zone comfortably, rather than setting up things that really weren't enjoyable. He has these many, what he calls dirty tricks, that would give you the chance to ease your way out of your comfort zone and then realize, oh, I didn't realize that was me. So he was a great influence. And I think obviously the teachers that were on the course all the time, Rosie Feynman and David Moore. David, the director, is one of the calmest, most easygoing and accommodating men I've ever met. In my first 2 years, all I could think of was, he's just too disorganized. It wasn't disorganized at all. It was structured in a very open way, and the training course itself allowed us to develop in ways that were not structured. So we didn't really know how things were going to change as we went along. And some people spent days, weeks and months just curled up underneath the table because wouldn't come out from underneath the table. I couldn't relate to that because I didn't have that emotional journey back then. And then other people were just expanding and exploding in their performances, and could see them change every week. So I think David's course, though I rebelled internally against it for the first 2 years, by the third year, I think he was a terrific influence on me. So yeah, and of course, the other teacher that came to our school once or twice was Terry Fitzgerald from Sydney, and he had a training school in Sydney at the time, and was one of the very first teachers back in Australia, having trained with McDonald's. So the very first time I did some chair work with Terry was very confronting, because it was a completely different way, and it was terrific. It was fantastic, because it wasn't the same old thing that we were doing all day every day. He had a very different type of direction. It was the same sort of direction I experienced with Misha Magadov and Peter Rebo, or the few McDonald trained teachers that I've worked with. They'd have a much different type of direction to the one that I'd experienced. So Terry was a terrific influence on me. And I know you asked me the question, who influenced me the most, and I couldn't think of anyone, but they're all popping up into my head now. The final person was Karen Chapman, who is an Australian teacher who is a yoga teacher as well. And she would come and spend a weekend at the school, a week and a weekend at the school once a year. And Karen, without fail, every trip, she'd bring her daughter Tara. They would inspire the people in the training course so much that everybody wanted to be a yoga teacher after they left. She's such a fantastic yoga teacher. I think has 2 or 3 different yoga degrees, as well as, well, nowadays, almost probably 30 years worth of Alexander teaching under her belt. That she was very, very specific, and it appealed to me, because the course was so open and flexible. Karen came in, and it was either a yes or a no answer. It was black and white, every question. And that kind of certainty and confidence was very refreshing. So, I think all these different people that we're exposed to gave us the chance to see, well, look, there isn't one way. And at the end of it, you've taken in all these different ways, and you have them in your toolkit, in a sense, when somebody walks through the door.
I remember working with someone from the Sydney school, and she said that they were told they were not to take private lessons from people outside of the McDonald's school.
Well, look, some of the most successful, in my book, people that I admire as having created the most success in the Alexander world have come from that McDonald line, and I think they are very sure of what they're doing. Maybe so sure that it stands in contrast with someone like myself, or people that have come through a training course that's so much more flexible and open, that, well, there's several answers here. Maybe this, maybe that. Let's give this a try. But with the McDonald type of people that I've experienced, it's black and it's white, and it's this way. I'll give you the direction that you're heading in, and that will stand by you. You can trust that. So, I think it's horses for courses. Whether the training course says you mustn't take any other lessons, or this is the only way, or it's a training course that says, look, there's lots of different ways. Just have a taste of all of them. See how you go. I've interviewed people for direction on this topic of, should you stick to one way and learn that before you go elsewhere, or should you be exposed to many different? And I can relate to both viewpoints. I think having the one way is very comforting, very supportive for that person, as I was in that first 2 years, who doesn't really know what they're doing there, doesn't really know what's going on. They think they do, but they don't. And to have the same message all the time, very powerfully reinforced, with no other inputs, could well be a very, very good way to produce Alexander teachers. I wasn't able to experience it that way, so I can't speak from experience. But as far as the end result goes, like I said, there are wonderfully successful McDonald-trained teachers, and I admire how they've taken the work and been very, very direct with how they've applied it in the world. So yeah, who knows? Who knows, Luke? I certainly don't have the what do you call it? The get up and go, or the confidence to run a training school. I don't think I ever would. I think people that run training schools, however they do it, are to be absolutely admired.
How is the Alexander technique perceived in Australia?
Oh, I guess it depends where you go. It depends who you speak to. In the performing arts, in the music arts, it's much better well known. It's at NIDA and Sydney Conservatory and the Victorian College of the Arts, and the top creative arts schools and colleges in our country have Alexander technique teachers, and very good ones. So it is where it should be, I suppose, if you think of it in those terms. That's where it began, and that's where it is still the strongest in all parts of the world. But when you start radiating out from people who are actually very dependent on the health and the coordination of their body for their career, which we all are, it's just that performers are that little bit more dependent, I think. Yes, the ripples get smaller and smaller. Karen Chapman who I referred to earlier, had 17 years of running a yoga group or yoga school from Sydney. And I think she inspired many, many people, if not a dozen, maybe more, to go on and train to be Alexander teachers, because she gave them such a strong belief and faith in the work. So they went off into the yoga world. So in yoga, there's probably a little bit more of an awareness of Alexander than other areas. But then from my background, and I'm not in the performing arts at all, I came purely through the need to fix my back pain. The options in that industry remain physiotherapy, chiropractic, osteopathy, and more and more nowadays Pilates and yoga. And although in my third year and then my first year out of training as a teacher, I ran a module at the Victoria University for osteopaths on the Alexander technique, and I thought, we can get osteopaths to be aware of the application and the benefits of the Alexander technique outside of osteopathy as a profession, then just maybe a relationship between osteos and Alexander teachers could be formed. I did that for 2 years, and then their funding got cut, and no longer did they think that Alexander technique was important enough to fund. So to answer your question, the way it's perceived in Australia is only by the industries that are actually exposed to it. Everywhere else, nobody knows about it.
So guide me through some typical conversations with strangers who are not in the performing arts when you mention that, when they ask you what you do for a living.
What do I do for a living? Generally these days I've been talking about posture. And this angle has come through the conversations I've been having in the last 12 months with people that work in the movement or active industries. So I've been interviewing people in golf, tennis, running, swimming, and Pilates, people that work with Alexander teachers that work in all of those areas. And especially in golf and in tennis, if you're going to talk to sports people about how we might be able to help them with the Alexander technique, you've got to use the language they use. So posture is a word they understand, obviously not the way we do. But in terms of improving posture or simplifying posture, what I've been noticing of late is that if we talk about posture, and it's a question I asked Richard Brennan, put me onto this. Richard Brennan from the island has a training school, and every introductory talk that he does, he asks the group, who's happy with their posture, or who would like to improve their posture? 9 out of 10 hands go up in the room. In the Western world, not many people are happy with their posture, whether that's justified or not. So many people would be prepared to do something about their posture if there was a way. So more so of late, Luke, I've been talking in terms of posture. But then other times, if I'm able to, and I've always been like this, even before Alexander Technique, I'm asking other people about what they do. And because I'm very interested in other people's lives, their careers, and whether they enjoy how they do what they do. And often I find out that they're office workers or accountants or truck drivers or waitresses or whatever. And it's from just getting a tiny bit of information about what they do that when they say, so what do you do? I say, well, I help people in, for example, waitressing. Do you ever get a sore back? All the time. Well, I help people with their work so they don't get sore backs while they work. Well, how do you do that? Do you give them exercises or stretches? Oh, no, I don't need to do that kind of thing. Most of the time, you're able to solve those problems just by becoming a little bit more aware of what you're doing. Oh, that sounds pretty simple. Yes, it is. It is quite simple. It is quite simple. It takes a little bit of attention. But if you're willing to let go, or if you're willing to look at something new, then you can change your life very, very quickly. And that's what I do, is I work with people and helping them with fresh choices. So obviously it depends on the person, on what they're saying, on what they're asking. And if they don't ask me what I do, I don't tell them. I'm an evangelist, but I'm not on the front foot evangelist for the Alexander Technique, if you like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where do you get most of your pupils?
Well, nowadays, my first 5 years from graduating, I set a room up at my home and then applied every marketing and sales skill that I'd learned from from the food industry or selling soft drinks, to find people, speak to them, run introductory talks, go to adult education centres, speak there, run workshops, do a talk or a presentation for massage therapists or reflexologists or anything like that. I had a file full of talks and introductory speeches. Some I got paid for, majority I didn't in that first 5 years. It took me about 2.5 years to build my practice up in suburban Melbourne to about 25 people a week. And at that point, that was my target. That's all I wanted to do. And it's funny, you speak to people in England who even, I think Walter Carrington has been quoted as saying that unless you're doing 50 or 60 lessons a week, you're not teaching. And my lessons were 45 minutes to an hour. They weren't 25 or 30-minute sessions. They were fairly lengthy. So those first 5 years, I went out and I put myself in front of every possible group I could. and I was willing to do that. Nobody in my class did. And not very many teachers, Alexander teachers I meet, really are wired for that. They want to teach, but they don't necessarily want to go and put themselves on public display. So that was the first 5 years. Then I took a couple of years off where I took that practice and I gradually introduced other people to work for me. And I focused then more on the reaching larger and larger groups of people, because, Luke, what was happening, what I realized after 5 years was even on 25 people a week, and it wasn't always 25 new people, it would be the new people that I worked with, I wanted to see them 2 or 3 times in the first couple of weeks. So I might have been seeing, I don't know, 3 or 4 brand new people every week. I wasn't going to reach my target doing that. And my target is still to change the perception of Alexander Technique in the world. And I just felt like, wow, 3 or 25 people a week, I'm never going to get there. I need to be reaching 50, 100, 200, 500, even if it's only in an introductory way, is explaining the Alexander Technique or exposing it to more people, the better. And if they come back for lessons for me or to somebody else, great. So I took a couple of years off to get that moving, and then all sorts of things changed in my life personally. So I moved from Melbourne to the Gold Coast. And since being here, I decided I'm not going to move. I'm not going to start a private practice where people come to the house. I don't want to do that anymore. I'm just going to see what comes my way. So nowadays, the last 2 years I've been here on the Gold Coast, I was picked up by a retreat, a health retreat called Gwingana Lifestyle Retreat. And they're a fairly high-class health retreat where people come for 3, 4 or 7-day stays and have all their food and accommodation, everything all included in it. And they're coming there to detox or to quit smoking or just reduce their stress and also learn. We run lots of talks and seminars at the retreat. And alongside the retreat actually runs a spa which has, on any given day of the week, between 40 and 60 therapists. And they're doing everything from massage through to acupuncture, beauty treatments, etc. And they've put me into the gym to do postural work, to work with people with back pain. I work alongside Czech trainers, personal trainers, Pilates teachers, physiotherapists. And depending on what the guests decide they want to do while they're at their retreat, they might choose Alexander Technique out of the menu of options. So at the moment, what I've been doing, rather than having long-term relationships with people, is I've been doing a lot of introductory lessons. So they spend an hour and a half, an hour and 40 minutes with me. And what it's given me the opportunity to do is to refine and improve that very first interaction. Some people come to me who've heard of the technique before. Many don't. They don't know what it is. It's been recommended to them by one of the spa people. I come to them and say, look, I've got this and I've got that. I've got this. What do you think I should do? Oh, you should go and see Paul for this. So they come and see me. They've never heard of it before. So the last couple of years, I've been refining that introductory lesson process, because most of the time they go away from the session with me and look up a teacher in their hometown. And I think, while it is frustrating at times because you only get them for a very short period of time, so you don't get to change a great deal, I do get to change a lot more inside their mind, switch the lights on, show them that there is an option that has been around for a very, very long time, is proven just purely through years and years of it still being around, as well as there's more and more science. And I get them to go away with a whole new perspective on what they can do for themselves, and that's what I've been up to at the moment. So I also get the opportunity to present to 30 to 60 people every week. And I don't have to go to the I don't have to go and find them and stick up posters and follow them up and make sure they show up to the event. The retreat gives me a venue, puts the people in front of me, and I get to tell them about Alexander technique, or as the case is at the moment, I run a breathing workshop. We call it breathing, but it's really all about the Alexander work. So nowadays, I get paid by this organisation for the one-on-one lessons, but my main joy is being able to reach 50 people every single week. And in the old days when I was in Melbourne and I had to organise those sorts of introductory groups myself, it took a lot of work, a lot of work, a lot of stress to run those introductory groups in different venues all around the CBD, and then get maybe one or two or three people come for private lessons. So nowadays I'm really enjoying being able to be put in front of a group, and it takes me very little effort. I just have to show up, the people are there, and I get to do my group presentation every single week, and I'm actually loving that.
How many teachers in Australia would you guess make their primary living from Alexander technique?
I could probably count them on one hand. I think there's probably 130 or 140 within members of the AUSTAT, the Australian Society. There's probably double that number of people who've qualified as teachers, but goodness me, the number of people that work full-time as teachers. And of course, AUSTAT isn't the only organisation. There's a couple of others. ATI has a few members, and also there is ATE, which is another group of teachers who have come via more of a Carrington plan, and that they don't belong to AUSTAT. I can't speak for them, but yeah, my opinion, I think I'd be able to count the number of full-time Alexander teachers on one hand.
Why do you think you've been able to make a go of it, while most of your peers who would like to teach just don't have many students?
Well, I hold myself responsible to a certain extent that those other people aren't getting students, because that was my intention when I trained. It was my mission to create enough demand for Alexander technique so that when a person graduates from their training school, their phone starts ringing. That if they don't want to go out and talk to groups of people, like I love doing it, I love being in front of groups of people, but if they don't want to do that, then the phone's ringing anyway. And that has been my intention for many, many years upon graduation. In fact, in my third year of training, I said to David, look, if I represent myself as your training school representative, can I go out and start making contacts with people? The Massage Association, or the osteopaths at Victoria University, or reflexologists. He said, of course. And I said, what I want to do is, if I can find the reflexology school and they have a student clinic as well, then maybe we could run our student clinics alongside each other, or share resources in some way, so that we're not just all we're out there doing our own thing. He said, great, do that. So that's what I did right throughout my third year, because in my first year of graduation, I didn't want to, wake up one morning and think, oh, I'm not at school anymore, oh, now I have to start from scratch. So throughout my third year, I was making contacts, and I was doing it not because I couldn't teach, but I could do it on behalf of the Alexander Technique Training School. And that's where it started. I intended to not create enough work just for me. I wanted to be so much work coming in from Alexander that these people that aren't wired the same way as I am could graduate, have the phone ringing off the hook, and just get to business. Get to the business of helping people that need the help. So apart from that side of it, where I feel as though, one of the main reasons these people aren't working is because I haven't been able to nail that yet. The other reason really is that that you train to be a teacher of the Alexander Technique. You don't train to be a marketer of the Alexander Technique. And I don't think that, honestly don't think I did a training course issue on direction called Schools of Thought, where I talked to all these different training directors, and every single one said there's not enough time in 3 years to teach people how to teach Alexander Technique, let alone how to really market themselves. That pretty much has to be learnt on the job. Some training course directors, like Richard Brennan, get people out with him as he's doing introductory talks in their third year, and then also supports them in their first year of graduation. He's the only guy that does it. All the other training schools say, look, there's just not enough time. 3 years is barely enough for people to, have a rough idea what to do, and I believe them. So when you graduate, unless you have either a background in sales and marketing or you like it, you're in big trouble. And I don't think that's a fault of the Alexander Technique Training School. I actually think it's a lack of the community itself. That, when doctors or osteopaths graduate, they've already had plenty of clinical experience. And of course the profile is much larger for their professions, but they still don't just go out and put a shingle on the door, and doctors get together, osteopaths get together, naturopaths and psychologists, they get together at a practice and form allied health centre. The Alexander teachers don't do that. I don't know why. I think it's, maybe it's cultural, but they need to. They need to pool their resources and put $5 or $10 out of every single lesson they do into the pot and pay for that stand at the Health Expo, or pay for an expert. When Karen Chapman closed her Yoga and Alexander training school, not training school, but Yoga and Alexander school in Sydney and moved to Brisbane, she had 17 years experience, so she knew exactly what she was doing. But she didn't just expect people to come and knock on her door, because in Brisbane there was no profile for Alexander Technique at all. So her and her husband invested into a PR firm to create a logo, to create a brand, to create a website, and to write the advertisements that were to go into the publications that fit the demographic of the person that was going to come for lessons. Karen and Tara had no idea how to do that, nor should they. They're teachers and yoga teachers. They're good at what they do. So I think they paid $20,000 or $30,000 over the course of a year or two to get professionals to write the words that the consumer understands, not explaining the Alexander Technique. You can't do that on a piece of paper. Especially not in a quarter-page advertisement, which is what so many Alexander teachers try to do. I'll put some advertising in the local paper. It's ridiculous. So what they did is they spent all this money on a PR firm, and it wasn't even so. It wasn't simple. It wasn't easy. It took them the first year or two to get going, but they hit the ground running because the general public were learning about the benefits of studying or coming to see them, rather than what is the Alexander Technique. They call their business thebackschool.com.au and got the PR firm to do the work for them so they could focus on being teachers. Now, the reason I believe Alexander Technique teachers are not doing this as a profession in Australia is they're not getting together and doing this kind of thing collectively. Whether or not a society can do that, I think it's just too fraught. I was the treasurer of OSTAT for 2 years, and it was, my mission was to free up, open the coffers and get the money out of the bank and out into the public arena, Alexander Awareness Week and those sorts of things. But with a society, there's so many different influences, so many people on committees and all of that, it's just so difficult. I think it's so much simpler. Call up the local teachers in your area, as they do in Washington, D.C. There's a bunch of teachers that get together there and cooperatively market themselves to the public. It's just the logical thing to do, and I don't know really why Alexander teachers in Australia have never done it. But, For my 2 cents worth, that would be the thing that I recommend that they do. Instead of sitting there and saying, oh, there's not enough work, I've tried this, I've tried that. Have you tried getting together with your colleagues and then hiring professional help, admitting to the fact that you don't know how to do it yourself, you know how to teach Alexander, and get the professionals to do it? Because whether you like it or not, whether you like what, and as Karen said, I wouldn't have written that advertisement. In fact, I hope no Alexander teachers see those ads. Sounds like I'm selling Alexander technique short. But she said that I don't know how to get people through the door. These people do, and once they're in the door, whatever methods we've used to get them through the door, then it can be explained to them. This is how it works, and there aren't too many unhappy people that come to do some work with Karen because she's so sure and so good at what she does that, you know, the priority is to focus on what you're good at. Keep doing that, and then outsource in whatever way you can the things you're not good at.
What are the biggest challenges that you commonly face in the introductory lesson that you give to Alexander technique?
The main thing that in that very short period of time that I find, because they're not coming back for a follow-up next week, is, and I make fun of myself and past people I've worked with the person who's in front of me now, and I demonstrate to them, oh, this is what most people do after their first lesson, and I demonstrate, you know, looking like a very stiff robot standing in and out of a chair properly. And I say to every single person, this is what most people think the Alexander technique is. It's something like this, and they laugh because I look absolutely idiotic. And I say, if there's one thing out of the information that we've shared today, one thing that you can take away, please take away the idea of not trying to move properly. And they look at me and the eyebrows go up and they go, well, what am I paying you for? And I explain it by saying, you're not learning how to move properly. You're learning about all this stuff that you're already doing, that you don't know you're doing, how to prevent that from happening, and then noticing what happens after that. So if at the very least, every single time you open the door of your refrigerator this week, you stop and you contemplate yourself for 2 seconds before you open that refrigerator, then you are on the path. You're on that yellow brick road of learning about yourself. Now, our method, what I teach, is the Alexander technique. There's a specific coordination of your head to your neck and your neck to the rest of your body that will facilitate an amazing transformation in your body. But you don't learn that in 5 minutes. You might learn what it's about in 5 minutes, but applying it takes a bit of practice. So at the very least, from today, you start to look at yourself differently after this introductory session and know that it is you that has the control. You have the power. Then I've done my bit. Because I can't really hope to communicate very much more than that in the very first lesson. And at this retreat, this is something else I make fun of, is in this whole wellness industry, in the mind-body wellness world, living in the moment, the power of now, the present moment, all this kind of stuff, all this, you know, I read The Power of Now back in 2004. And loved it. I bought a dozen books and started giving it to my students. You know, because I thought, this guy is talking about what we're teaching. And The Power of Now, Eckhart Tolle, that very first book, he didn't tell anybody how to do it. He just talked about it. And I thought, wow, you know what's missing in this book? Is an explanation of the Alexander technique. So I started giving that book to my people, and some brought it back and said, that's great. Some brought it back and said, I don't even know what he's talking about. But at the retreat and in the whole wellness industry, people talk about living in the now. And That's all well and good if you're meditating, or if you're doing yoga, or if you're trying to come to terms with how to do that Pilates movement. That's terrific. But what are you doing the rest of the day? And as far as I'm concerned, it's lip service, talking about living in the now, because nobody knows how to do it unless you've got a method or a means whereby of observing yourself without judgment and noticing what's going on, which is what the Alexander technique is. Now, I interviewed Roy Palmer, who's an Alexander teacher in England, for the golf article in Direction, and his story is so interesting because he'd been studying karate for 8 years, trying to find, had glimpses of that sensation of being in the moment or in flow. 8 years of study in an Eastern martial art. He went for his first Alexander lesson because he'd heard it might help him with his back pain, which nothing had solved as well. And in that first lesson, got a sense of what the now was, how he could find the now. Went home, put on the kettle, had a cup of tea, was still in the now, and it completely blew him away. Because here somebody gave him the sense of how to practically live in the now. And to come back to your question, when people have that first lesson with me, I say to them, if you can contemplate yourself as you're opening the fridge or as you're about to turn left in traffic, taking in the world around you but also aware of yourself, then I hope you think of me, or I hope you think of the Alexander technique as being the means that you can achieve that, because that's what we're dealing with. Your body knows how to run itself. The more you get out of the way, the more the right things run themselves. And that is what everyone's talking about living in the now.
What is Direction Journal?
Oh, I'm glad you asked that question, Luke. Speaking of which, I have to give you a link through to my website. Direction Journal, the story goes back to my second year when I met Jeremy Chance. He was one of the teachers that came to the training school. And, I might add, blew everybody's mind because he was talking and teaching in a way that none of us had come across before either. That was more the Marge Barstow type of way. And anyhow, met him that first year and really loved his work. It was fascinating. Next year he came back in my third year of training. He said, look, I'm looking for somebody to run Direction. You might be able to do it. And I was pretty taken that he thought that I could do it. And I said, okay, I could give it a shot. What's involved? And I thought he meant he would own it and run it, and I would help him out. And he said, no, I can't do any of it anymore. You'd be taking the lot on. So I took about 7 months of communications back and forth via email between him and his brother Nick in Sydney, understanding the business side of it, understanding the writing and editing side of it, and eventually decided, you know what, this could be the vehicle that I can use to proliferate Alexander technique into the world. It seemed like what had fallen into my lap, a vehicle. So I said, yep, I'll do it. So I took it on, and Direction Journal had been running for about 15 years before it got to me. And Jeremy Chance had been creating these magazine or journals on Alexander technique where he would get people to write, publish all these articles. A lot of them were controversial because it was material that wouldn't be published, or that the societies wouldn't publish this sort of thing because they had to make sure they didn't upset anybody. But Jeremy Chance wasn't too worried about upsetting anybody. He just wanted to make sure that the communication throughout the profession, in a sense, a similar sort of thing to what Michael Frederick did with the congresses, was to get the word out to all the teachers in far-flung places of the world. So when I took it over, I took on that heritage and decided to keep it going. For the first 4 or 5 years, I was able to do that, and then realized that model wasn't working, and not just the articles themselves, but the subscription model, the business model, everything. It was sending me broke. So I closed it down and decided I don't think I can do this anymore. I certainly can't afford it. And that's where Direction went on pause, if you like, for a couple of years. And then I discovered all kinds of different ways of using. At that point, I had a little iMac, which was, the little green iMacs. They had 6 gig of memory, and I was running Direction on that thing, and I had email, but it was pretty basic. So once all that got sort of tossed away, I came back to the whole idea a couple of years later with a new iMac, and newer technology, and the internet had come that much further, and you could outsource a bit more. And I thought, wow, you know what, I can do this now. It's very possible to run this business by myself. And that's what we've been doing since. We've been changing the editorial angle gradually in an attempt to not alienate long-time subscribers, but also in an attempt to make the journal more readable by the general public, more usable by Alexander teachers to reach the general public. Because the way it had been written in the past, it was very, very deep, very introspective, very all about Alexander technique and me, Alexander technique and how I teach it. And the general public, we're never going to be able to read that and think, what the heck are they talking about? So what I've been doing since we began production again in 2009, is writing articles that are readable, understandable, and usable by Alexander teachers to reach the general public so that they can understand, well, how does Alexander technique apply to golf or tennis? Or what about with teaching children? How do I teach children the Alexander technique? I did an issue on teaching children. It's the most recent issue that we did, because I wanted Alexander technique teachers, as well as myself, to learn more about how to reach into schools, reach that generation where I think if we don't reach the children, Alexander is going to remain pushed further and further out into the fringes because of the competition there is in the market for all kinds of remedies, all kinds of modalities, all kinds of new inventions every day of the week. And I seriously think that reaching the children in simple ways that teachers in England and even in Israel, one of the gentlemen I interviewed, they are reaching children in ways that any Alexander technique teacher can do. And so that's what I brought into that latest Direction issue, was methods and proof and testimony and stories, so that Alexander teachers primarily could read it and say, oh, well, I could do that. I might give that a try. And written in such a way that you can give that magazine to the school principal or the school teacher or even the piano teacher that you take your children to. They can read it and go, wow, this is really interesting. I don't understand completely how the Alexander technique works, but I can understand that it is working. I might give that person a call. I might find out more about that for myself. So Direction Journal, which is what we're still calling it, is probably more these days Direction Magazine, because it's less formal, it's less heavy. I'm leaving the heavy stuff for the societies to do, and they've got plenty of heavies in there to toe that line, and we're trying to open it up a little bit more with the Direction Journal. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it kind of throws all kinds of ideas at you about what Direction is. Yeah.
So I've asked the main questions on my mind. Is there anything you'd like to talk about that I have not asked you?
Well, I think the main thing that I find myself talking about and wanting to talk about are the success stories. When I was at the Congress at Lugano just recently, I found, I talked to many people, and I wanted to know what their story was. Are you teaching full time? Oh, no, I'm not. Oh, yes, I am. Oh, really? What do you do? There are Alexander teachers in the world that are doing extremely well. Amazing things. One lady I met just by chance in the work exchange room is the Alexander teacher for the UN in I think it's Italy. She's got 5,000 people that are in that workforce. 5,000 people, and she is the Alexander technique teacher there. And I just boggles my mind. I mean, not every teacher can do that, I suppose, but this lady doesn't strike me as the sort of teacher that I am, where I'm out there, happy to promote. She's a very quiet, softly spoken lady, just doing her job in the background. Perfect job for, I think, the majority of Alexander teachers that want to work full time. And then there's the lady that works for Victorinox in Switzerland, who has upwards of 900 to 1,000 people on the staff, and that's her full-time job. Well, full-time, I guess not full-time, she only does like 1 or 2 days a week with them, but has created the potential for full-time work there. At some point during her career, she has worked full-time. And it's these stories, Luke, of successful teachers that I'm endeavouring to get out to the wider population of Alexander teachers, to show them that it's possible to work full-time. May not necessarily mean working from the security and comfort of your own home studio, but not just that it's possible, but this is how it's done, and this is how you could do it. Because it isn't rocket science. I've interviewed Michael Gelb a couple of times in the past, and it's a little bit daunting, because this man just has so much charisma, so much personality oozing out of him, that an Alexander teacher meets him and says, well, I'm not like that. And it's true. Most of us, if not all of us, aren't like that. He's an amazing man. But there are the quietly spoken Alexander teachers that are working in the back rooms of big corporations, doing amazing job. I don't know even half of them. But my conversations, the ones that I enjoy the most, Luke, are the ones with people that are doing well. Malcolm Bulk, the running, Stephen Shaw's with swimming. And it goes on. There's many. I can't even list them, but they're the conversations I enjoy the most, because I feel as though, there is hope. There's hope. Yeah. People are doing it, and they're doing it in very, very doable ways. It's not big budget stuff, not great big advertising budgets and all that kind of thing. So if we can share those conversations more, then that's what I'm all for. Is empowering Alexander teachers to do more for the world. Because I think without our influence on education, on movement, on consciousness, without our influence, I think I can't see any other modality in the world that can do what we can do in a moment, in a matter of a couple of minutes. And Rachel Zahn in Europe is attempting to bring Alexander technique to the consciousness science. If she manages to pull that off, and her story is phenomenal. You've got to interview that lady. If she pulls that off, then it might come from the top down. But I think my way is from grassroots, is to meet the people at the ground level and spread the word gradually through them, as these other teachers have done. So if ever you want a conversation on the best ways and means to reach the general public, You can call me any time because I've got lists of stories, and lots of them have been published in Direction already, but I'm always looking for more.
So let me ask you a follow-up question. How widespread and popular do you think Alexander technique could be? Do you think it could be like yoga?
Well, I think I learned quite a lot from my conversation with Helga Fischer when I've interviewed her for the Pilates article. She's an English Alexander teacher who came from a dancing background and then studied Pilates. Alexander then studied Pilates. And she was one of the co-founders of the Body Control Pilates empire brand that's massive through England and around the world. And prior to that happening, Pilates was still a one-to-one thing that only the rich or time-rich people could do. And, expensive equipment, very convoluted, hard to sort of explain or disseminate out into the general public awareness. And what she was able to do with Lynn Robinson, the other founder of the organization, was simplify it. Now, I'm not saying that Alexander technique can or should be simplified, or even taught, on a group basis. I'm not sure if that necessarily is the only way to go, but I definitely think that the premise and the basics of Alexander's technique, the sort of things that, I went to Michael Frederick, his workshop at the Congress, and the sort of thing that he does in a group, which is an introductory group, and then people then will probably come for lessons. Those sorts of things are very straightforward, and they help people look at themselves in a way they haven't before. I think that kind of thing I really think those sorts of ways of sharing the ideas of Alexander technique with 500 people in a room. Obviously, you can't touch any of them, probably, and not necessarily bringing somebody out the front, but methods of having people learn something about themselves that they haven't learned in any other way before. Pedro's good at these sorts of things as well. And you may not call it the Alexander technique, but whatever you do call it, they think, wow, that's really interesting. I want more of that. And that first introduction may not be, this is an introduction to the Alexander technique. It may not be that. It might be more of a self-awareness or self-control or self-regulation, whatever the buzz type of word is. The engine behind what we work with is the Alexander technique. It's Alexander's work. That's what works. But up front, if there are better ways of reaching the masses, that's what I'm looking for. Because as Mike Gelb, he does very large groups, companies and all those sorts of things and public presentations. And if people ever ask him, I want to study this more, he doesn't do one-on-one lessons. He will say, look, I've got a couple of colleagues in the area. If you want to take this work, this creativity, or if this self-awareness work further, you've got to study Alexander technique. Now, he hasn't probably mentioned Alexander in his presentation, but it is the foundation of what he's teaching. So I think perhaps if there's better ways to reach larger groups of people so that then they decide to, dial 1-800-ALEXANDER or whatever it is, that's what I'm looking for, is how do we disseminate enough information for people to say, wow, that's great, I want more. And I don't know that many teachers that work only in groups, and I don't know whether or not that is the solution. But perhaps from a group of 500 people, introductory talk, 250 come back to the next level of introduction. That might be a group as well. And then after that, those 250, you've already touched 250 people. The second 250, maybe 100 or 80 come to one-on-one lessons. You've still touched 500 people that may one day come back or may one day tell someone, I did this workshop, it's about self-awareness, it was really cool, you should look it up. And throwing the net wider like that with things that are palatable and more understandable for those for the normal person that isn't so introspective as an Alexander teacher, that they can actually say, that's interesting. I mean, that's what hooked me. The very first time I heard an Alexander teacher say, you learn about the things you're already doing that are causing the problems, and you stop them, the problem goes away. It blew my mind. But I was 4 years old as far as looking for a solution. I was 4 years into it, and I wasn't willing to take no for an answer. So I was a unique individual. All the people I meet in the training schools, they're unique. They're people that are, they're a little bit different to the average person. The average person doesn't want to spend days, weeks, months, and years learning something. They want to get on with their lives. That's why they go to chiropractors. If we can make it simple enough, they go, oh yeah, I'll be willing to put a couple of hours into that, maybe an hour a week, over a few weeks. If that's enough, then great. But as far as reaching the mainstream goes, I think there are enough different success stories, whether it's body control Pilates or whether it's Bikram yoga or whether it's any of these sorts of large group classes that have taken off. Zumba, for example. I'm not suggesting turning Alexander technique into any of those things, but there must be something from those delivery models that a bright Alexander teacher can glean from that and find a way to reach people more where they are. I'd like to know what that is. I think that's what's lacking. If we keep doing it one by one by one, we aren't going to change the world.
Okay, great. Hang on a second.